Hello, welcome back to the channel. So, the biggest problem kind of discussion that people have had for a while now, besides just the lack of events, is power creep and whether or not it is a big problem. And I think the main problem with kind of the discussion around power creep is that both sides of the argument are true at the same time. Like, power creep is a thing, just objectively. Like, the newer characters are just stronger than the old ones. Which I do think it is good for the new characters to be strong, because them being bad is way worse, because it just kills any kind of hype, and characters being strong is just more fun for the average player. I think that the problem is when it feels like it's the only good option. Now, I do think some people do kind of take this a bit too far. Like, I think most of the 2.x characters and archetypes, besides maybe like Break, can clear fine. They just aren't as like insanely broken as some of the newer characters are. It's mainly just the 1.x characters that do really need help, and some of them were already kind of bad even when the game came out, you know? And to be honest, I think like the feeling of only the new characters being good does also come a lot from just the buffs being way too favored towards the newer characters, especially in things like MOC or even in the new mode to some extent, since, well, at least for MOC, there's only one buff option, whereas in Apocalypse Shadow and Pure Fiction, it feels like there's a bit more leeway because there's more options for buffs. I think like the main problem with power creep in general is that no one can agree how good characters actually are. Like, I've seen people say that Archer is bad now, which is just objectively not true. He is very strong. Like I'll be honest, while I do think that power creep is a problem, and I will get more into it in a second, I feel like a lot of people just want to be able to clear no matter what. Like, they just want it to be easy. Like, you still need to have good supports and good stats on your relics to clear no matter what character you're using. Like, if you can't clear with characters like Maide or Herta or like Fei Xiao even, unless you just don't have good supports, which, like, why would you pull them in the first place? Like, it's just a skill issue. Like, I'm sorry, it just is. Like, Star Rail is not a hard game, but you do still have to actually kind of actively think about what you're doing. You can't just press the buttons and win, unless maybe you're playing like Castris, but even then. Like, don't get me wrong, there is definitely some problems, like the main one being kind of just the lack of good budget options for a lot of teams. The main ones right now are like Remembrance MC, who might end up just getting replaced by Cyrene and Gallagher. And maybe Tingyun as well, who is good, but is just nowhere close to how good Sunday is in like energy teams. There is also like Small Herta, but she's only really good in like Pure Fiction and on Herta teams, so she doesn't really have that much diversity. And there is Hunt March, but she's only really good in Fei Xiao teams, so only really Remembrance MC and Gallagher are able to be used in a wider variety of teams. Like, and for DPSs, you only really have Archer, who, while he is really strong, you do kind of need Sparkle to really get to, like, that next level, unless you're just doing something like running 3 supports or something. Like, us getting free 5 stars has definitely helped with this a lot, and I think that if they do keep doing this somewhat consistently like they have been, I do think this could be a lot less of a problem in the future, especially if we get more supports like Ruan Mei, or even the new version of Dan. But right now, I just don't think it is quite enough, especially with the kind of lack of Jades we're getting, which I think is kind of the main problem, because if you're only going to do 5 stars, well, we should get more Jades to compensate for that, but at least in this patch, for like all the events and stuff, we're only getting 2,150 Jades, which is literally only 1 10 pull. We do get 10 more from the Login event, and we are at least getting Dan's New Far for free, so it does kind of make up for that a bit. But only 20 pulls is still awful. Like, now that's not counting, like, getting all the stuff from the endgame and that kind of stuff, but still, like, you would need those characters to be able to beat the endgame, so it's kind of this weird position where, like, you need the Jades to be able to beat the endgame, but to be able to get the Jades, you need to beat the endgame, you know? Like, it's especially a problem when most of the good teams right now are almost all 5 stars, and characters that go with each other will often come out right after one another. Like, Ceridra came out right after Finon, Hyacinth came out right after Castris, you know? Like, these characters have been kept getting put in, like, pairs. So unless you're just insanely lucky, there is no way you're going to be able to get all of these characters. Now, obviously, you don't need to pull from every single character. Like, if you don't have Dot, you're not going to be pulling for Hyacinth. But there are some characters that are insanely core to certain teams that, like, if you don't have them, you might as well just not bother building those characters. It doesn't help that they have been pushing certain characters like Kazra's insanely hard. Like, she's already gotten 2 new team members, and she didn't even come out that long ago. So them just like pushing a lot of the newer characters harder with more new characters, just I think pushes the feeling of them only being the good options even stronger, because a lot of the older archetypes aren't really getting any new characters. They're just kind of stagnating, you know, besides maybe like Acheron, and that's about it. It doesn't help that we have still not gotten any word on more buffs since 3.4. At least official information. Maybe there's like leaks or something, but I don't look at leaks and I don't like talking about leaks, so I'm not going to talk about any of that stuff. And like, we could really use some more buffs right now for older characters, especially for some of the 4 stars, because they could help a lot with how limited some options are right now. And I do hope that when they do buffs, they don't only do it for just limited characters, because I feel like that would just kind of wasting half of the point, you know? And I know some people will say, oh, you can make those characters work with enough investment, so why does it matter? Well, using Celia as an example, can you make her work with enough investment and supports? Yes, but that doesn't change the fact that her kit has problems. And if you need an insane amount of investment just to get her on the same level as a newer character, I think that there is a problem there. Like, that's why I always talk about, like, the characters' kits themselves, and not, like, what tier they are, because I'm gonna be honest, I do think tier lists have kind of skewed people's perceptions on how good or bad characters are a bit. Like, I feel like a lot of people think that if a character is not, like, S tier or, like, tier 0, then they're bad, which is just not true at all. Characters like Blade, Yunli, like Topaz even, are all good in, like, in their own way. They just aren't as, like, insanely OP as some of the, like, top tier characters. And, like, I think having characters be better than others is fine, as long as those other characters are still able to, like, 3-star most of the content in the game. And I think most of the 2.x characters and the buffed characters are able to do that. But, like, I do think part of the problem isn't even just with the characters themselves, but also just with the design of a lot of the content right now. And, you know, like, part of this being just the HP of the enemies getting to kind of absurd levels, honestly. Like, the HP going up does make sense to some extent as players, you know, get better builds and, you know, build up better teams and that kind of thing. But I think the amount of HP is just way too much, to the point where it's just really obnoxious and just kind of feels like an artificial way to increase the difficulty. Especially since in MOC, the actual mechanics of it haven't really changed at all since it came out. Like, the buffs and the enemies do get rotated, but the actual format of it, it's still the exact same. It's still just like one buff, like, in 2 different sides, and like, that's it. It hasn't gotten a rework like Pure Fiction, which I do think it could really use because it's just really outdated. Like, at the end of the day, power creep is gonna always be a thing, and I do think it is a problem. And if they don't announce buffs in the next live stream, I think people will get a lot more annoyed than they already are. But I do think some people take it a bit too far. Like, some of it I do think just comes down to people not wanting to actually build their characters, which, like, I do get to some extent. Like, you know, trying to get good relics can feel pretty bad. The endgame should still feel somewhat challenging. It shouldn't just feel like a cakewalk and you could just one-shot anything. And I feel like some people just want to be able to clear with, like, mediocre builds. At the end of the day, like, sorry, at least still a strategy game. You do need to have, like, good teams and, like, good builds to actually be able to clear the content, no matter what character you're using. But I don't know, what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.